Hey, thanks for joining us again at the European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Conference here in beautiful Prague, as you can see behind us. It has been nice, like all week, looking out the window. Skip those sessions, don't talk to those experts, ignore the expo hall, look out the windows. It's been beautiful.
And drink hot wine.
For some people, that's great.
Yeah.
So, well, why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
My name is Mark Rackley, and I work for an organization called the Pate Group, where we do Office 365 and SharePoint consulting services. I'm also a Microsoft MVP, and I've known you now since you were a wee one.
About 10 years.
Yeah, about 10 years.
About 10 years, yeah.
I'm John White. I'm the CTO of Tygraph. We do analytics for Office 365 and delivering out things through Power BI. So, vested interest here. I'm also a Microsoft MVP for SharePoint and Power BI. So, yeah, ready to go.
Excellent. Well, hey, the topic here that we're discussing today, so it's actually kind of the genesis of the project. And Mark, I'll let you kind of give the background. But came out of a discussion following with Microsoft Ignite this last month. And it spurred a community survey. So why don't you kind of talk about kind of the lead up to the survey?
Sure. So there have been a lot of changes, as we all know, going on with licensing around Flow and Power Apps. And we have found that we have a lot of customers in our organization that were impacted by that. And as we go and create new estimates and new statements of work for clients, and we're doing things around forms and workflow, we have to take into account, if we go down the Power Platform path, are there going to be extra costs that the customer needs to be aware of? And it's becoming more and more often that's the case, that there's extra costs. And when we bring those to the customer and we say this is we even say like this is probably the best platform for your solution based upon being with what Microsoft is doing, it's going to be good, future proofed. This is a solid platform. However, because we need to do these extra things, there's an extra cost. And how do you feel about that cost? And it started to impact the way we create estimates. And I really wanted to know if this is affecting other people and how it's affecting them, because that affects the way we try to pitch stuff to companies as well. So I wanted to get a true understanding of that and not and go beyond the just, we don't like it.
Right. And I think part of the conversation came and where we involved John and the Tygraph team as well, and a number of other players in the community. So it wasn't just about Pate Group and Tygraph. There's about a dozen companies that kind of said, hey, we're interested in seeing the data and being able to talk about and analyze what are the impacts of some of the licensing changes. So we did this community survey. So we had a decent response out of it. So we ran it for 2 weeks. We had 228 responses. We kept it very short, very simple, some basic questions. We wanted to understand the size of the organization that people were responding from. We didn't get into capture any personal information. We didn't even go in and identify roles of people responding, but answering kind of for their organizations. And then we asked them to self-measure what they thought the impact to their business would be, and then we asked some open questions. We asked, how is that? So to kind of rate the impact, and then how is it impacting do you foresee it impacting your business? And then what you're doing because of those impacts. And usually when you ask a short survey, a community survey, and have an open-ended question like that, with the research that I've done, is that you have, at best, maybe 1 out of 5 people filling in kind of the long answers. And I'd say well over half of the people that responded, probably higher than that, 60% or so, people responded with details. They filled in those boxes with their feedback and some interesting stats there. The first thing is about responses by org size. When you guys look at this, kind of what are your thoughts around that?
I was actually struck by how many large organizations responded to the survey. Usually you just get a lot of little ones, and that, the org size really, typically you'll have things that impact a small organization but are good for a large one, or vice versa with any of these changes. We've had really good representation from the high end of the market. In fact, disproportionate representation from the high end of the market. But you want to combine that with the impact level. What the other thing that strikes me along that side is how evenly the impact is. It seems to affect all organizations kind of at the same level. There's a little tiny bit of variation, but statistically insignificant.
Yeah, I really thought there would be probably a higher dislike for it from the smaller companies, and I thought the large organizations are like, well, it's I mean, this is the price of doing business. We understand it, but it's like even across the board, people's feelings on it. So that was probably what struck me the most.
And to give some context here too, we had a 1 through 7 with 7s and being a serious impact to my business to a 1 at the opposite end saying 0 impact to my business. The average impact was 5.79. And so as you look at what's nice about the data, and I should point out that we have a blog post going up tonight on the ESPC blog, and so you can find some more detail with some snapshots of this data. So we're able to go in and look at the impact level by the organization size. And so, I mean, even looking at the spread, as you said, I mean, it's in between the lowest impact there of 5.4, the highest of 6.2, and it's very level, consistent across the size of organizations. But we also asked, the question is whether they're even familiar with these licensing changes. And so you had, of the 228 respondents, 160 that said, yes, I'm up to date, I'm aware of these changes. 55 said that I saw that there were changes but haven't really dug into the details of that, and only 13 answered, I wasn't aware that there were changes. So people were coming into this knowing that, hey, for the most part, we're aware of this, well aware of these changes, and then they had an opinion on that. Yeah. And so the other two questions, the things that we kind of dug into were like, how are people responding to this? And what I think is really interesting about this, so you have a number of different options that people could fill in, which preset options to how to respond, how it's impacting their business. So we built those into the questions based on feedback, things that we're hearing, that we just know that people have stated to us. We have quite a few that are in the long tail of one person responding to each of these. But the vast majority, the top responses here, were that people said these licensing changes to Power Apps and Power Automate will slow or halt adoption internally. 125 of those respondents.
Yeah. That's over 50%, so that's huge.
It is huge.
I think what's interesting, and if you read the language here, or what's particularly telling about that, this will slow or halt adoption. And I think part of the problem here is not necessarily what the licensing model is, but the fact that this was unplanned. Because they started down this path, or they've started down some sort of a rollout with one understanding, and kind of had the rug pulled out from underneath them. And I think that's something we should really focus on in here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think that's probably why, even if you are not too adverse to the price, why it's going to cause you to pause a little bit, because these were unplanned, unannounced changes to licensing. And I think that really made some people uncomfortable with moving forward. Yeah,
and then the next most commonly responded to item is that we will investigate alternate solutions.
Ooh.
Well, it just makes sense. If you're going to have this cost for things that used to be free, and there are third-party tools out there, and if they're feature-rich and less expensive, why not look into them? I think this this makes me a little sad, because Power Platform is spectacular, and I would love to see us find some nice common ground. I understand why Microsoft needs to increase the prices, but I would love it if there was just some middle ground that allowed them to get what they needed out of it, but then also allow us to continue building without, spending a lot of money.
And again, we'll share more of the data, the specific responses, the numbers behind these in the blog post. But just to round out the top 5 of the top responses there, we will be conservative in our use. People that are still unsure of the impact and they're still trying to understand the impacts. And then number 5 was we're already in the process of moving to an alternate solution. So, there are those that feel that there's a high impact. It's not surprising. They're looking around and say, well, what else do we need to do to move forward to meet our customers' needs?
Yeah, and just to call the one, we will be conservative in our use. you never really want to penalize people for using your product, right? That's you're backing off on adoption is really what we're talking about, and adoption is something we want to increase. So yeah, none of that's particularly shiny.
Yeah, and the one thing that I do want to make sure that we're very clear on, especially people who aren't familiar with licensing changes or maybe have some misinformation, if you're staying in the Office 365
Yes.
space of connecting to SharePoint and doing things within that space, you're not going to run into additional costs for the premium licensing things. It's when you try to go outside of SharePoint in things like Azure SQL or other premium data connectors or on-premises, that's where you're going to start running into some extra costs. Or if maybe the really popular thing we used to do was call other flows using an HTTP connector. That is probably one of the biggest things that impacted people because that became premium. But I just want to make it clear that if you're doing things within SharePoint, staying in SharePoint Online, you're not going to be experiencing extra costs for that.
And I think it is important too. I mean, the last question we were asking about, we were trying to figure out a way of capturing some data around how people, they thought it was too expensive or not. I think it's the vast majority, 190 of those thought it was expensive or too expensive. The third category, not sure, and then the fourth, the smallest, the reasonable or competitive pricing around that. But I think what's more interesting is actually when you start in those open-ended questions, when you start digging into the other solutions that people are considering, and there's certainly patterns there and the common third-party tools that we're aware of and other options. But even beyond that, I think it'd be more interesting is when the question there of saying, well, what else would you suggest that Microsoft could do? And I think this is to put a positive spin and feedback from Microsoft. It's really, I think, in this question. And this is where I was surprised by the high percentage of respondents filled in this open question.
And they weren't overly negative. They weren't like,
No.
bashing. The thing is that people love this tool set. They love it. And they want to use it. And I think that's very positive that they responded in the way they did.
Well, that's the difference too. I think because in some of the pricing nuances there, if you're saying, well, it's really expensive for a generic thing, but when you have, if you're talking about, very specific connectors or, whatever the options in or bundling out there, there's, I think, ways very easily that for these respondents that they could see value in paying those the higher prices with these few adjustments. So I think it's something that we're going to share with the community, and I'm sure Microsoft is interested in taking a look as well.
Yeah.
Any other responses?
Yeah, it's. I think it also. There's a bit of a deeper issue here I'd like to address with this, and this is another instance of something we've seen a few times in that licensing seems to be left to the end of the discussion when we're architecting or introducing new technologies. And when you think about it, it's actually a core part of architecture or design, because if something isn't going to work financially, you're not going to be able to adopt it. Right. So there's no sense in handing someone a technology and say, hey, invest a lot of time building up resources or skills or architecture based on that, if you're only going to be taken out at the knees later on from a cost standpoint, and it just won't make sense, you're not going to be able to do it. And that's just a waste of everyone's time. I would really like to see the concept, and it's not about how much it costs, and it's not even about the licensing model. It's about knowing what the licensing model is ahead of time and not down the road. And I'd really like to see that part of the initial discussions with product planning, as opposed to let's wait till the product goes GA before we talk about the numbers.
Well, I mean, to defend those guys a little bit, they don't know what they don't know, and they are just rolling things out and saying, here's some great tools for you guys to use. We don't know how they're going to be used. We don't know how they're going to be adopted, so we don't know what it's going to cost.
True, but I think we should think about that a little more ahead of time instead of just throwing it at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Well, They have not said Cortex is going to be free at all, so.
So I think they've learned some of those lessons.
I agree.
But honestly,
We don't know what it'll cost.
Right.
And
No.
that's a problem.
And correct, but so I think that and if I can just play devil's advocate, so the first time that we saw it as MVPs at the MVP Summit, just by the response in the room, you would have thought there was a lot of excitement around that. That should have been an indicator to kind of get those things in order before it goes GA. To your point, so. Well, anyway, so again, you'll be able to find out the results of the survey out on the ESPC blog. Please, take a look at that. If you have any questions, you can reach out to these gentlemen here. What's the best way to get in touch with you guys?
So you can email me, imrackley@pategroup.com. You can follow me on Twitter, imrackley, and my blog post is markrackley.net, or my blog site, I should say.
JPW at Unlimited Viz. My Twitter handle is DiverDown1964 because I have the second most common name in the Western world. And my blog is whitepages.unlimitedviz.com.
So the coolest blog name in the world, by the way.
It's not
White
bad.
Pages, yeah.
Or my podcast is also something I would advise people to listen to. Bifocal, bifocal, focusing on BI.
That's true. I do. I have a podcast as well with 3 other MVPs. It's Techsplaining, so at techsplaining.net. So you can check that out.
That's when you explain things to someone ad infinitum.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Yeah, I was just going to say that that the younger generation in just a few years is not going to know what you're talking about with white pages. White pages. Yeah. So it won't be as clever, will it, John?
I don't care.
He'll be retired by then. He won't care.
Anyway, thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.